This is In Between Them, a podcast where we uncover what it really felt like to be a child of divorce. I am Shannon Darrow, and each episode brings honest stories from brave adults who lived through this as children. This is In Between Them. Let's get going. Well, welcome, Carly, to the In Between Them podcast. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. I just wanted to kind of start by asking you to share a little bit about your background, where you grew up, how you got to where you are, what you do for work, and then we can kind of dive into the real meat of why you're here.
Okay, sure. My name is Carly Stoltenberg. I am 55 years old. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. I moved to Arizona when I was 22 years old for graduate school. I went to ASU, and I am a speech pathologist. I've been in the field for about 30 years.
So for people that may not know, and that kind of includes me, I feel that we hear speech pathology all the time, but what exactly is it? Like, what do you do on a day-to-day basis?
Sure. Well, the wonderful world of speech pathology is that you can do a bunch of different things. There's medical-based speech pathologists as well as school-based. There's clinics, nursing homes, things like that. But essentially, we work with children and adults, infants, all the way up through death for anything that has to do with communication, feeding, swallowing. So essentially, from the chest up is what we work with. So
Interesting.
I
So it's
actually
not
work in a school.
okay. So it's not just about talking. It's
Not at
actually, there's a
all.
lot of,
No.
okay.
Yeah, and it's the very little is just the articulation. When people think of speech pathologist, I think they think of people who work with kids on how to say their S's and their R's, and we actually do that, but we also work on communication as a whole. So we work on language, so any of the vocabulary, sentence structure, grammar, things like that, social aspects of language. So people who are neurodiverse, who have social language issues, autism, ADHD, will work on social language. And then the more medical aspects would be, so if someone has a stroke and they are unable to talk or if they can't swallow. So, fun fact, I actually had speech pathology myself. About 9 years ago, I was diagnosed with something called Guillain-Barré syndrome, where I ended up in the hospital completely paralyzed, and the illness paralyzed my muscles for feeding and swallowing. So I needed a speech pathologist to come in and determine if I should be tube fed or what kind of food I should have. I couldn't breathe, so I was on a ventilator. I always say we're all just one accident or illness away from a life-changing
Yes.
experience.
Oh
So
my gosh. How was that being a speech pathologist and needing one? You obviously, if you're on a ventilator, you're not really communicating,
there
so
were
did you have a say in what they were doing, or were they just kind of working with you the way they thought?
I actually just last weekend was an invited speaker at our state convention for speech pathologists where I spoke about the patient perspective. It was, in a word, humbling. All of the things that I thought I knew or the things I did, especially early on in my career when I was afraid to say I didn't know something, all came kind of rushing back to me. And as you mentioned, when I was on the ventilator, I couldn't communicate using my voice. So I have a lot of friends who are in the field and they all kind of rushed to my side to offer augmentative communication devices. My friend put a laser pointer on a visor to try to get me to move my head to point to letters. But with Guillain-Barré syndrome, like I mentioned, I was paralyzed, but I also I had double vision, and it was exhausting. So anything that required a lot of coordination or a lot of effort was like a no-go for me. So I developed my own system of communicating. It kind of started to evolve where I would just close my eyes and someone would go through the alphabet and it opened my eyes on the letter I wanted. And then I had to communicate, write it down because I would start to spell and then people would be like, oh, did you say A or was that F? So they had to start writing it down on a dry erase board. And that evolved to writing my most frequently used words and phrases on my hospital window in the ICU with a dry erase marker. So they would start there and say, is it one of these words or phrases? And then I would say yes or no. And then they would say, okay, is it a vowel? And I would say yes or no. And then if it was a yes, they would go through the vowels first, and then they would go through the consonants. So that's how I communicated.
That is incredible.
Yeah. And
I
my
mean,
kids were 8 and 9 when this happened to me. And as we'll talk about later, I was a single mom. I had left their dad when my kids were about 4 and 5.5. So here was their mom who they were told, might not ever walk again. I coded a couple of times. So it was very, very scary. And they had mostly lived with me during that part of their life where they only were with their dad every other weekend. So they had to go live with their dad and his girlfriend for 4 months. So that was a whole other thing. But one of the things I was talking about recently that I thought was really interesting, I think as a mom, you can probably relate to this, that it doesn't matter how you're feeling, your mom brain kind of kicks in until your kid is taken care of. So for me, when I first entered the hospital and my parents flew from California when they found out, one of the first things I was trying to communicate before I completely lost the ability to talk was, hey, I think Jake and Kate have a dentist appointment next week. Can you please call their dad and tell him he needs to take them?
oh my
Wait,
God.
Easter's coming up. I already bought their Easter basket, so can you put it together and give it to them? So it wasn't until I kind of felt like my kids were taken care of that my body kind of was just like, okay, now you can relax.
Oh,
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
is an incredible story. And I don't know how many people do something for a profession and then have what I would say is a blessing, although it is very scary and weird way to get there, but then to have the blessing of the flip side. So you have the patient perspective of your profession that has got to have changed the way that you approach
It
everything. I mean, that's
absolutely
just
did.
fascinating. And
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you said you shared last week somewhere. That is an incredible perspective and experience to share. I'm sure it helps and enlightens and answers questions for so many people that do what you do that would never have gotten that perspective.
The first part of my presentation, I actually talk about ways to facilitate resiliency in yourself and in your patients, students, clients, because that was a big part of my recovery. That originally my parents were told that I would never walk again and that I would be in in a nursing home the rest of my life. And so I did a lot of research on resiliency once I got out of the hospital. And what I found out kind of applies to like the divorce situation as well, is that resilient people have bad days. Resilient people have days where they're crying, screaming, cussing, and saying, why me? But then the next day they put on their big girl panties and they get up and they take care of their kids and they go to work. And, I have found that in the years since my divorce, I did have days where, especially in the beginning, where I just wanted to put the covers over my head and not get out of bed. But I was like, well, I have kids to take care of. I can't do that.
Mhm.
But I have other friends who went through similar situations and even had more support than I had. I didn't have any family living here in Arizona when this happened to me with my divorce, but friends who had more support who to this day I feel like still have not recovered from their divorce because they just don't have the same type of personality of being able to put themselves into someone else's shoes or to say, you know what, someone else wants to be right where I am in this moment. There's always someone who has it worse. So I think that is the perspective that I've tried to take, from my illness, of course, but also through my divorce as well. And being able to, I
Yeah.
found strength in numbers through my illness and through my divorce of, being able to talk to other people like this podcast. I'm sure it's going to be very therapeutic for me to talk to people who have similar situations and experiences.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. And what that kind of made me think about was the patient perspective is kind of like the child's perspective, which, not a lot of people are going to have the patient perspective in the profession that you're in. But what we're trying to do is give the child's perspective to these parents so that they can do it better, so that children in the future are their impacts are minimized. We never can take away everything that happens to a child in divorce. It is not what was intended in terms of raising children in a family. But the way that we can compound the impacts is incredibly diverse and intense and extreme in all the different ways that kids are unintended victims, really, but have unintended
Lateral
impacts.
damage is what I say.
Yes, for sure. And so if we can minimize any of that, then we're in a better situation because we're never going to, we're never going to take it all away. Divorce itself is a traumatic event for any child. So you already have kind of one check mark. It's really about what we do after that as parents. And so the more we know, to your point, the more you know in what your patient perspective is, the better you do your job. So the more we know, the better we do as parents. So, with that said, I want to introduce kind of why I'm talking to you, how you fit into this, because you aren't my typical guest. My typical guest is an adult who was a child of divorce, and really trying to gain what was in their head at the time that they were going through all of that. And you kind of found me and introduced me to your daughter as a good person to speak with. And so, this podcast will be playing after as part three of a 3-part series. So Kate is your daughter. And then what came to light in that was also you have a stepdaughter, and her name is Sydney. And so she is kind of part 2 of this series. And what I did was ask you to listen to both of their episodes and reflect with me on that, on what you heard, on what you thought, on what you felt. And I think what it can show is the difference in the perspectives. So many times we think we know what our child is thinking or feeling, but the reality can be very different. So I want to start, and you take the lead on how you want to delineate between Kate and Sydney, because the timing, the ages, the situations were very different. But overall, what surprised you the most?
Honestly, all of it. And after listening to both Kate's and Sydney's, their experiences actually weren't as different as they made them out to be. And I can talk a little bit about that. But the biggest takeaway for me was that the majority of the trauma for both of them came from perspectives and memories that weren't always accurate. Okay, so I'll start there with Sydney thinks that she was so much older than my kids when she went through it. And the reality is that she wasn't. Her parents actually got divorced when she was 5.5. And my kids were 4 and 5.5.
You're saying when their parents divorced, it was similar ages. Okay.
And so listening back to it, listening to both of them talk about how it happened was not always correct. So I'll start with Sydney. I know Sydney spent a lot of time talking about how she found out that how I came into her life was that her parents were living together, still married, and that I suddenly showed up and moved in. That was not how it happened. I actually, as I mentioned, I'm a speech pathologist. Sydney and Kate's dad, my ex-husband, is a teacher. And so when I transferred to his school when I was about 32, we met just through being teammates. But as we started working together, we became friends. And through becoming friends, I had learned that he had gone through a divorce about 1.5 years before I even came into the picture, but that he and his ex-wife were still living together while his ex-wife was having a house built. So
Wow.
Sydney's memory of it is that I started dating her dad while her parents were still living together and married. I actually, before I even started dating Steve, I thought it was weird that he still lived with his ex-wife. And so 6 months into our friendship, when we were going to maybe start dating, I said, I need to see this divorce decree because it's weird, right? And so
Yes.
that's when I saw that they had been divorced. What I also didn't know that came to light years and years later is that Sydney's mom had wanted to still work on the marriage after they were divorced. And my ex husband was kind of also dabbling in that. So, from Sydney's perspective, her parents were kind of still working on things because that is what her mom's perspective was. So, I came into that situation where she thought I was like this homewrecker. And
Oh.
Sydney talked about a memory where she and her mom had come over to her dad's house after they had moved out, and then I had already moved in. And that was not accurate. We'd gone on a date and I was over there, and I remember that situation. And I remember Steve and his ex wife, Nancy, going outside to kind of fight about it. But I wasn't even living there. I just started dating him. And the reality of it is that Steve and I dated for 2 years before we actually got married. And I didn't move in with him until after we were engaged and had been dating for a year and a half by that
That's
point.
so fascinating because those are all very significant pieces of a puzzle that kids put together. And it is never the fault of the child that they are putting those pieces together.
Right.
And some of that I don't think was appropriate to tell her. Some of it could have probably been explained in age appropriate ways, but the reality is it's the awareness of her being aware that needs to be confronted.
Yeah. No wonder it was confusing for her.
And what I would imagine, I don't know anyone in this situation, but what I would imagine is the reality is not telling her leads her to believe something that probably really warped her thinking of you and just the situation in general
Absolutely.
for a long time. And that's exactly why I wanted to talk to you, because I think it's so interesting to have you listen to this and to say and to identify where these gaps in understanding were, because then in talking to her we see how that played out for her.
But the other part of it was the waters were muddy, that her mom
Yeah.
thought they were working on a relationship. And I'm sure Steve was making it feel like that at some point. So it is true that I came along and probably busted that dream that Sydney had of her parents being together, but it wasn't the way that it actually played out. So that did have an impact then on my relationship with Sydney very early on, where she shared the story of us going to dinner for the first time and her saying, "You sit next to her dad, she's your friend. My mom says that you have no backbone, that you're a doormat," like things like that she said to me.
Yeah.
That is true. That is very
Wow.
true. And in listening to Kate, my daughter, tell her story, it was a lot of that not really understanding, or their memories were not exactly correct when, like, how old they were.
What was a surprise from Kate as you were listening to her?
Okay, so a surprise from Kate. And this is going to be based in the fact that Kate is still a child. She's
Right.
still living at home. She's 17. She's in her senior year of high school. And she still has that hope that her dad is going to make some changes and be the dad that she wants him to be. Sydney, I know, has shared information about her relationship with her dad and how it's evolved to the point where she's going to be 30 soon. And she right now has no relationship with her dad.
Mhm.
And that is because I continued to have a relationship with Sydney even after Steve and I were divorced, because from the minute I met Sydney, I had said to her that I wanted to treat her the same way as I would treat my future children. I was so excited to be someone's stepmom. So I did tried really hard with her. I know she took you through me taking her to counseling and things like that. But when Steve and I divorced, originally he had said to her, "You can't have a relationship with Carly," because she was 16 when I divorced him. Then when she was old enough, she still started having a relationship with me again. But when she got married 2 years ago, her dad found out that not only was I invited to the wedding, but I was going to be her maid of honor. And he was so angry. He said, "She's not your mom. She shouldn't be there." And then she told him, "Well, not only is she going to be there, but she's my maid of honor." So that pushed him over the edge. Kate is still living at home part time with her dad. She knows she still relies on him for money, and she wants him to be the dad that she wants him to be. And so she's not yet ready to have difficult conversations with him. Kate has told me that she's learned to just say, "Yes, dad. Okay, dad." because she's a peacemaker. Where my son, you didn't get a chance to talk to him, they butted heads where they kind of stopped talking at the end of his high school education because he didn't say, okay, dad, yes, dad. It was arguing with him. So Kate learned through watching Sydney and her brother. I feel like she's still trying to maintain the peace of her
Yeah.
relationship with him as well as her relationship with me.
And,
And she keeps things inside.
in fairness, I don't typically talk to people under 18. The fact that I wasn't looking to her for this incredibly adult, reflective perspective. But what I did find when I was listening to her was she has a maturity about her that I think tends to come from kids that have dealt with divorce, and especially where there's been conflict, it tends to rob them of their childhood in some aspects. And so, that's why I felt like it was okay to talk to her because there was a level of maturity there. And because of her age, I was not interested in pushing her for more. I think the perspective that she gave was really about the details within the life she was living, going back and forth, parents not communicating with each other. That to me is very helpful for parents who are in those same situations. And I felt that her awareness around that, was really significant. And so,
Yes, I agree.
was there any other example, like you had with Sydney, a very specific example of something that surprised you? Was there some specific thing Kate said where you were like, wow, I didn't see it that way, or, that
Yes.
wasn't really how it happened?
Yes, actually, when Sydney's parents were divorced, Nancy and Steve, I came from a family where we didn't have any divorce. So I lived under this illusion that maybe it's not an illusion. I think it's really would be best practice that you can still get along as a family, And so I, again, wanting to treat Sydney the same as I would treat my own children, said, hey, I know that your parents haven't been doing things together, but your mom is always welcome to come to our home for Christmas, Thanksgiving, birthdays, because I don't want you to ever have to choose who you're going to be with. And so, Nancy, yes,
I have a question about that. Was that message, and I don't want to get into the dynamic of the adults, but was that same message that you're conveying to Sydney conveyed to her mother directly?
yes. So,
Okay.
in the
Because that's a
beginning,
lot to say to a kid when a
yes,
kid
no,
really can't go
no,
tell their mom, hey, come over to dad's house.
no. So, in the beginning, when Sydney's mom didn't know me and she was telling Sydney, Carly is a doormat, Carly's a bitch, or whatever she was saying about me, my feeling was I'm going to treat Nancy with respect because she is the mother of my stepdaughter. So Steve and Nancy did not communicate. And so I became the go between for the two of them. So I started talking to Nancy and saying, hey, I know that your family isn't in town. Do you want to come celebrate Mother's Day with us? Do you want to? And so Nancy started coming over, and Nancy and I to this day have a good relationship. She started giving me cards on Mother's Day and saying, thank you so much for being a great co parent to my
Wow.
daughter. So it was only in the very, very beginning before I really met Nancy where things were tense. But I wanted to smooth things over. I wanted us to all co parent together. So
Right.
that was what I thought, since we were able to do that with Sydney's parents' divorce, where all of us would get together. I thought we can do that with my divorce too. And I remember thinking that Demi Moore and Bruce Willis had just gotten divorced around the same time that I was divorcing Steve. And so I had read all these articles about how they are great friends still and great co-parents and their new spouses get along. And so I told Steve, that's what I want. I want the Demi Moore Bruce Willis divorce because you and I were best friends before we even started dating. And there's no reason why we can't continue to like each other, right? Especially because I don't have family here. So I didn't want to just have a Christmas where it was just me and my kids, I was inviting, I'm still friends with Steve's parents, his mom and his stepdad, and I was friends with his stepmom until she passed away. So we would do these huge, like, and it was just funny because people would come over and be like, well, how are you guys all related? And we're like, well, I'm not related to any of these people. Like, they're exes of stepmoms. And so,
That's
but we,
hilarious.
for a while, we did things together. And then it got to a point where, I mean, when Steve had a girlfriend, I even would invite her over for Mother's Day.
Because, so if I remember, because Kate said that you would either, I think she said you would have him over for Father's Day and then he would help the kids get you something for Mother's Day. That was her early memory before she has different memories. So that's,
Yes.
is that what
So
you're getting to?
sort of, and some of it's correct, some of it isn't. Whenever he'd have a girlfriend, I would always try to say, hey, I would like to meet your girlfriend because I want my kids to be accountable to any adult that's in the room, and I expect them to be respectful of whoever it is in your life. And it worked with one or two of the girlfriends, but the one that he had while I was actually in the hospital sick, he lived with her for 5 years. And the kicker is that her ex-husband divorced her because she didn't want kids, and he did. So then she ends up living with a guy who has two young children, and she does not like kids. So I mean, that was hard too, and that's one of the reasons why I had my kids more than 50% of the time, even though it was supposed to be a 50-50 split. She didn't want my kids over there. When we first got divorced, Steve made the decision to change jobs the week before Jake started kindergarten, so he couldn't get Jake to school and couldn't get Kate to daycare.
Okay.
Every morning that he had them, I was going over to their house so that they could sleep in. He would leave at like 5:30, go to the gym. I would wake them up, get them dressed at his house, take them to school, keep them at my house until he was able to come pick them up after work. So it was me, all me, for a
So
really
that
long
makes
time.
sense. Yeah. So I mean that makes sense. So they didn't have any awareness that the stepmom, the
The
girlfriend
girlfriend.
didn't want kids. They just that was the already established schedule, even though
Well,
maybe
yes,
the judgment wasn't
it
there.
was established, but they did know that she wasn't warm and fuzzy or
I mean,
anything
that's
like
probably
that.
something you pick up on as a kid, I would assume,
Yeah,
if someone
absolutely.
doesn't like children. Yeah.
Absolutely. Especially like when I'm paralyzed and in a hospital and I'm having to have friends of mine help out with the kids because she wasn't even willing to drive them to school. So her saying things like we didn't spend time together, like all together, that she had to make choices, that wasn't for like probably 5 years in, was finally when Steve was like, we're not friends, we're not doing this anymore.
So if you divorced when she was 4, you're saying roughly that's around
Mm.
when she's 9.
Yes.
Which, arguably a kid's memories from 4 to 9 are gonna be very different,
Yeah.
I would say really her memories are probably gonna be more like 7, 8, 9, where they're pretty clear. It's not to say they don't
Yeah.
have earlier ones, but
I used to always, in my mind, say, I continue to be Steve's secretary because he didn't check emails, he didn't check backpacks. So I would email him and say, hey, just want to let you know that the kids have an orchestra concert or it's parent teacher conferences, because I wanted him to show up. It wouldn't have served me well or my kids well to have him not know about these things. So I was constantly behind the scenes trying to, quote, make him look good or to have him be part of things that I thought were important. And my kids have no idea that I was doing that. All they saw was the conflict, because there was conflict, right? Like, it was very, very difficult because even though I tried to kill him with kindness, so that's what I kept trying to do, thinking that if I take the kids more when he needs me to, like, or tell him when a concert is, or drive them places when he needs me to, that I'd be banking like the nice points. And so then when I needed something, that he was going to help me out. And it wasn't like that.
you can do all the right things and think and again, you're trying to show it to your kids, but like you
Mhm.
said, they have no idea what's going on behind the
No.
scenes. But the reality is they shouldn't. They just should be able to be kids and
Mhm.
living in this life. And so trying to be kind, of course, you're hoping that you're going to get that in return and that's what your kids are going to see. But when it comes to divorce, that's very pie in the sky.
It's
And
very
some
pie in the
people,
sky. And
to your point, you had both. You had this situation with Sydney's family that were able to do that. And so, how hard and frustrating must that have been that you couldn't do it over here for your two kids? But the reality is, there's different people involved, at
right.
different stages of their life with so many different factors going on.
Mhm.
Um, okay, so what did you hear when you listened to either one? I have one that stood out to me from Sydney, but what did you get as like a huge blessing when you heard them that you did not realize they had, been receptive about or that they reflected on that you're like, wow, that's a good thing.
Sydney's is the most obvious to me, but it wasn't the first time hearing it on the podcast. She talked about how when she was very little, that she had gotten diagnosed with ADHD, but then her parents didn't want to put her on any medication and they also didn't have her in counseling. She said that they did, but when I met her, she was not in counseling. So she was a very hard child to parent, and she says that about herself now. But I would find myself yelling at her for things, and I didn't want to yell at her. So we went to counseling together, and I talked to the counselor separately of saying, I need different strategies because what I'm doing with her is not working. I don't want to yell at her. I love her. Again, I want to treat her the same as I would treat my own child, which means I can't just give up on her. So we started going to counseling together. And then I also was reading a lot of books about parenting a child with ADHD. So I developed like this behavior type of plan that I did with her to try to teach her strategies for being organized, because that she would just get unorganized. She'd forget things, which caused a lot of stress and chaos for everybody. So I would give her strategies to use. And in the moment, she didn't want to use them. And we butted heads a lot on that stuff. And then when she was probably in her mid 20s, she called me one day and she goes, I just want to thank you. I feel like you tried so hard to have a positive relationship with me. And I feel like you've made me the adult that I am today. And she's like, I want to share with you that all of those strategies that you tried to teach me for being organized that I didn't want to use, all of a sudden I thought about it that I'm having some struggles in my life now. And I want to use those strategies. And she's like, I started using them and things have gotten better. So it was very rewarding to
Yeah.
hear, because when I was in the moment with her, I felt like a shit stepmother, like that I didn't know how to help her. And it's like
Yeah.
I do this for a living. I work with kids who are neurodiverse and I couldn't help her.
Yeah.
I mean, looking back now I did, but I mean, in her, like, she had a journal that I found and she was writing things like I hate Carly, so in the moment, I was hearing all these terrible things, but then later on as an adult, to know that we have a great relationship and that we're friends and that she still counts on me for things. And also, I can count on her. Like, she's become so mature that we talk about things and she helps me to parent, especially my son, who is very similar to Sydney, who has ADHD. She's become a true blessing in my life, that the roles have reversed in a lot of ways where she parents me. So,
That's funny. That was along the lines of what really struck me. Um, I am really becoming acutely aware of how critical step parents are to either the devastation of a child or the thriving of a child. And when I heard that, And my son has ADHD. And so I know the battle of trying to understand how their brain's working. And my son is very mild, but there's still things where I'm like, why are you doing it like that? I don't, or why doesn't this occur to you? And taking a minute to educate myself, or years to educate myself, to understand why he's doing it that way and how I can help him shift to a different way to look at it. And so many things which you get that I won't go into,
Yes.
but that love and care and support and awareness takes a tremendous amount of effort from a parent. And then to be able to help her, and her reflecting on how, I can't remember her was her name tag or something that she kept losing, and so she put it in the same place all the time, which was something that you taught her. And I just thought, wow, to see who that came from was incredible. And it's such a beautiful example of how a step parent can step in, and doesn't
Agreed.
sound like, she didn't say it, you haven't said it, sounds like you didn't try to overtake her mom. You just knew your role and you respected that, but you also saw an opportunity to help her.
She mentioned her mom wasn't around a lot when she was in high school, from freshman year to senior year. Her mom was busy with going to law school. So a lot of it did fall on me from a very young age. Even we had her a lot, and so I took her to school. I took her to doctor's appointments. So all those things. So it's about having a positive step parent in your life, but also having the parent that accepts the role, because I felt like Nancy did a better job of accepting it than actually Steve did,
Yeah.
because I was doing all the running around with her. So then I was the one where she didn't have what she needed, or she was making me late for work. And so I was trying to set consequences. But my husband at the time, would say, "You're not her parent. You can't discipline her." And I'm like, "What?" Like, you can't have it both ways. And so that was, again, one of the reasons why I started going to counseling, is because I wasn't getting the support from him that I was getting from her mom.
One of the blessings that I'm seeing from kids of divorce is that they actually go on to be really good step parents, if that opportunity is what is in their life. What's interesting is you didn't come from that world. Your parents are together. However, you had this experience, like kind of in between your own kids, that almost gave you that awareness. I have talked to other people that have remarked that when a step parent kind of defers to the parent, and I don't mean that in a way that is like in a reverence type of way that you're so much better. It's just more saying, I know I'm not the parent. For example, a woman said, I just texted the mom and said, I would like to do this for your daughter, or whatever her name was. Is that something you think she would like? Or is that something that you would do for her? Kind of like not getting the okay, but also trying to incorporate her in trying to plan something nice for her. Is this something that's kind of up her alley? And it started a relationship with them where they bounced ideas off of each other and created this environment, kind of like what you described with Nancy. And, I think that takes a very big person to say, I'm going to try and have a relationship with this mother. Or I'm sure it goes the same way for a father, but mothers and fathers are different. In this case, trying to establish a show of respect at the same time, you're also saying, I'm in this kid's life. And so I'd like to do it the best way I can. And so I'm reaching out to you because I'm asking for your help to make the right plan, or whatever the situation may be. That seems to go a long way. And the reality is it goes a lot further for the kid than just for those two people. And so, like I said, I'm seeing a lot of devastating situations with step parents, but also really beautiful ones. And yes, this podcast is about the child's perspective. What's coming out of that is that step parents are critical, absolutely critical, for the good and the bad. And what kids or parents need to know when they're choosing people, kind of to your point of choosing someone who doesn't like kids, when you have two kids,
Mhm.
Kids under 10. It's not like you have kids that are 22, you know? I mean,
Mhm.
kids under 10, they live in your house, they need a lot of things. It may not be the best choice. And understanding what that impact could be on your kids, big picture, if you can keep your kids first, that might be something that you need to think about. Okay,
Yeah,
we've
and
totally
when
sideways, but I think
they
it's
broke
so
up,
critical.
when they broke
Yeah,
up, that was one of the things that Steve said to me, because in between relationships is when he talks to me, and he just said, "Oh, that was never going to work out anyway because she doesn't like kids." 5 years later.
yeah, yeah,
So yeah.
yeah.
So,
Interesting.
anyways,
So, okay,
but
so something great you heard from Kate.
something great that I heard from Kate, I mean, it's a blessing and it's a curse too, is that she's able to, like you said, the whole being so mature for her age. I think that she had to parent herself a lot after Sydney left. Sydney described how she would kind of assumed my role when I left Steve. She was constantly babysitting for the kids and making sure they had what they needed. And so Kate's kind of been left to parent herself. Um, Especially now. My kids are only a year apart in school. So Jake left this year. He's in college. And she is alone with her dad because her dad broke up with the last girlfriend that he had and they moved out of her house. And so for senior year, it's just been her and Steve. And so she had to grow up. Not that she wasn't grown up before, but the days that she's at his house, a lot of times he's not around. So she's cooking for herself. She's going to the store. She picked out all the things to decorate that house. So
It's
she's
amazing she still goes there.
so that she goes there because about, let's see, in 2022, I had a relapse of my Guillain-Barré syndrome, and my house has stairs, and there was no bathroom downstairs or bedroom downstairs. My fiance and I were planning on moving in together that following year, but it kind of pushed things forward. So I had to move 30 minutes away to Phoenix. All of her friends are in Gilbert, which is 30 minutes away. So she will tell you that it's easier for her to be at her dad's house, especially now that he's not really there, so she can do whatever she wants. And she has the car over there that he's given to her. So every morning when I have her, I drop her off at her dad's. She picks the car up, she drives herself to school. She gets out of school pretty early, so she goes and tools around Gilbert, goes to track practice, goes back to his house, and then I pick her up from there. So she has a lot of independence where even though I made a commitment to my kids that when we moved to Phoenix that they were never going to miss out on anything in Gilbert, because to me I'm like it's just 30 minutes away. Jake would have football practice, so I'd pick Kate up and we'd run errands, or I'd sit in the car for 4 hours waiting for him. So it's just easier because she has the freedom to just get in the car and go wherever she wants. So that's why she's been spending more time over there. And in fact, she's been spending some of my parenting time over there because I understand that it's easier for her to do what she needs to do.
Does that worry you at all that she's alone that much?
No, no, because she's 17 and because she's not home that much. She is at school and then kind of uses his house as a home base.
Okay.
But she prefers to be with me because I'm the person who has always gotten things done for her. So if she needs to go look for a prom dress, she would rather be with me than go do it on her own or be with her dad and things like
Yeah,
that. So
yeah,
it's been nice to see that. I think had she not been in this situation, especially being the youngest, I don't know if she'd have all the skills that she has because this generation, I have made a mistake of doing too much for both of my kids. So it's a blessing that she's more mature. She's
yeah.
mature beyond her years, but I also feel sad because I know that there's a mask. She's guarded and she's not completely honest with how sunny everything seems when she talks about how great her relationship has been with both parents. And, you know, I there were some dark times where neither one of them wanted to be with him. And so I always said, it doesn't matter what the parenting plan is. Once they were like 16, 15, 16, I don't care what the parenting plan says. If it's okay with your dad that you want to be over here more, then it's okay with me. And the reverse is fine true too. If you want to be at your dad's house because it's easier, I'm totally fine with that. It's not about me, as long as it's okay with him that you can be there. Because they've always had to ask. Like they used to have to ring the doorbell or knock. It wasn't like their house because a lot of times he lived with someone else.
Yeah.
And here at our house with Brian, they're welcome in and out anytime they want. But that was another thing that was always hard to watch, that they weren't always welcome over there.
So I have a couple thoughts on what you just said. And that's really pretty amazing that they had to knock or ring the doorbell to go to their dad's. There's so much in that, but I'm just going to leave it there. What that's telling a kid is profound,
I
you know?
I know.
And again, lacking awareness as to what just giving them a key or telling them to walk in, what that opening up of your home so it's their home is a small thing to do to give them a lot. I do think that being free to be flexible as they got older so that their schedule really reflects their needs and getting past the point of making it a competition between the two of you. My perception is that when some flexibility around the schedule comes into place for these kids, when they have wants, desires, needs for it to be a little bit different, it changes everything for them. You know,
Yes. And the
people
good
that
news about
feel,
that is that we were always flexible,
yeah,
because anytime they wanted to be with me, he was okay. He was fine with it.
yeah,
And anytime he needed them to be with me, I wanted more parenting time. So they never missed out. Like I've seen really sad stories. Like Kate and I belong to National Charity League, which is a mother-daughter volunteer organization. We meet once a month on a Sunday. And even if it was Steve's Sunday, he would still drive her to the meeting or I'd pick her up.
yeah,
We had a friend, same situation. Her dad wouldn't let her go on his weekends because he wasn't part of National Charity League. That was never a problem. So the flexibility, and also both parents supporting what their kids want to do. And I know Sydney kind of made reference in when she was really young that her dad wasn't interested in some of the things she was interested in. And that is true. Like Jake wanted to play baseball, but Steve didn't want him to because he thinks baseball's boring, that kind of thing. But the bigger picture is, for the majority of things that my kids wanted to do, including Sydney, I was able to have that conversation. Sydney wanted braces when she was really little, and her mom and dad didn't get braces till they were adults. And they were basically like, well, she can wait till she's an adult. And I was like, nope. I'm like, we're going to pay for it. Like, she doesn't want to smile because of her teeth. So I was able to have those conversations. So, yes, like you talked about how it's positive if you can have a relationship with the step parent, but the step parent should defer to the parent. I feel like it was almost like the three of us were parents of all of our kids, because if they didn't want to do something, they were more than happy to let me do it. And Nancy, she was in my kids' lives. There was one point when Jake was probably about 3, he said something about, when I grow up, I'm going to go spend half the time at Nancy's house and half the time at your house, because that's called step parent. And I'm like, well, Nancy's really not your stepmom. But like we really did, I think, work really well together. And I feel like because of my background and working with kids, and also because I love kids, they both knew that I love their daughter, and
yeah.
that any decision I had made or any suggestion I had was in her best interest. So it wasn't like I went in there and was like, we're doing it this way.
What you said, how I said defer to the parent, I don't mean always defer
Yeah.
to the biological parent. I just mean I think coming in that way, kind of subtly, is probably a better way than coming in with a hammer. Like, I'm going to
Yes.
be a
Well,
part
yeah.
of this
I mean,
trio, you
but I
know?
feel like that's
But
the same if you're the parent or the step parent. If you're a parent
yes,
that always comes in with a hammer, it's not going to work.
yeah,
But
you're
I
right.
also, when Steve told me that I couldn't punish Sydney, I wasn't going to be like, okay, I'm deferring to you. I'm like, no, I'm the one that's taking her to doctor's appointments that she's
Right,
making me late to or whatever. So, but it
right.
was having the conversation the way, same way you'd have a conversation, whether or not you're biological parent or not, a respectful conversation, I think.
Yes.
And again, I think you have to defer to a parent, whether you're both together or not, in any type of parenting
Well,
situation.
and I think,
You know what I mean?
you had a very specific situation, but it's, looking at what your life experience is, you probably had validity to help, you
Yeah.
know, and credibility. And so it's about saying, I'm not threatened by this. You have an expertise that I don't have, and it might help
Yes.
my daughter. So, sure. The flip side of that is mom's going to go pay a therapist to do exactly what you're doing,
Yeah.
you know? That's where, you know, laying down your arms and saying, we can do this all as a team. But that is so much easier said than done. I mean, take it
I
from
know
me,
it is.
that is not my situation. So it's very, very easy for me to say. I do want to ask you one more thing as we're talking about, you know, the shift in perspectives. Kate went very much into detail about how you guys, her parents, have each other blocked on their phones and how she was a messenger and all of that. I would love for you to give me a little bit about how did that make you feel hearing that, and what was the truth around all of that at the time based on how she described that.
Well, it's true. When was it? Gosh, I think, I don't remember. It was when Jake was still in high school. So a few years ago, I guess, he had called me in a panic because he was at Steve's house and he was late for school. And or he had, oh, I know what it was. He had overslept and missed the bus. And he was crying. He was in a panic. Neither one of my kids are kids that try to oversleep, that want to miss on purpose. And in every situation, I've always, no matter where I am, even if I'm, working, I will leave and go help. And so it happened to be that I was like an hour and a half away at a different school. And I was like, Jake, I can't come get you. I know that your dad has sub time available. He can come and get you. And Steve was refusing to pick him up. He was just like, it's his fault. He overslept. I'm like, he has ADHD, whatever. So I said to Jake, call your grandma, Steve's mom, ask her if she'll pick you up. And when Steve found out about it, he called his mom and told her that she couldn't pick him up. So we got into a big fight about it where I just said, this is your kid. He needs to be in school. He's trying to get there. And Steve hung up on me and blocked me, so I couldn't call him. And then he said, all communication will now be through email. So I wasn't given a choice. A lot of stuff like that was always control issues because to me, what's the difference between like texting somebody and emailing someone? It's the same. But he said, I will no longer allow you to text me. You have to email me. It made it difficult because there were several real time things that I needed to call him about that he had me blocked. And so I had to use the kid's phone. So that they were put in the middle for things like that. Jake broke his leg at a track meet and I was there. Steve was up north and I had to get Jake's phone to call his dad to say, hey, Jake broke his leg. I'm on my way to the hospital. So both kids knew why it was important to be able to call someone in real time, but there was nothing I could do about it. So, yes, they were kind of put in the middle of that. And don't get me wrong, I've made lots of mistakes where I've said things not very nice about their dad. Like that's not my goal, but there were times I was put in a position where I felt like I had no support. And that was finally 2 years ago with the whole email thing where he was emailing me like nasty emails. And I finally just said, look, we're in a place in our lives right now where I no longer like am relying on your financial support, because he never paid through like the courts. It was that he just paid me. I paid for everything. He was supposed to give me half. And then I said, and in terms of the emotional support that I received from you, I don't. Like anytime I've needed you, when Jake broke his leg, you told me that I had it handled, that you weren't going to be there. So there's lots of times I've counted on your parents for that emotional support. But at this point, the kids are 16 and 17 years old. They have cell phones. If they need to make a change to the parenting schedule, I'm fine with it, as long as you're fine with it. If they need to tell you about a concert or a sporting event, I don't need to be your secretary anymore. So, in order to preserve my mental health and have this toxicity out of my life, I'm no longer going to be receiving emails from you. So, if you want to talk to me on the phone or whatever, you can unblock me, but I'm not emailing you anymore. You can communicate with the kids. That I did put that on them at 16 and 17 years old, because I felt like I had nothing to say to him, because everything was always an argument. So that's kind of what happened with that. But it is
So
true
that
that
was, it was, so when I listened to Kate, in my perception was she was much younger when that happened. So it was more like in the last couple years. Still, I think
mhm,
hard, I
very
mean, just
hard.
kids are 16. When you look back when you're in your 40s, 16
Yeah.
does not mean that you're capable of handling things.
And to
But
me, it doesn't matter how old you are. My parents are still like giving me emotional and financial support sometimes. Even though she's 17, I agree with you. It doesn't, she shouldn't be put in the middle. And that those kinds of conversations have been difficult, and it's been hard because I finally have to just sit back and again say the same thing I said to Jake. Doesn't matter how much evidence I bring to why he should pay for this or why he should do this or why he shouldn't do this. He's going to do it his way anyway. And so I'm not going to engage in those arguments anymore. But it
yeah,
took me a long time to get to that point, because I would just get so frustrated
yeah.
that, and it was, I had zero control. I had to do it the way he wanted. Didn't matter if I thought it was best, because I just had to try to keep the peace.
I wonder what the kids think when they kind of hear that from you. What did you say? You said that I just kind of say, it doesn't matter what evidence I bring to him, he's going to do whatever he's going to do. I wonder what they think about that.
Kate agrees, and that's why Kate has started saying, "Yes, Dad. Okay, Dad," because like he's going to be moving again in June. He told her she has to be out June 1st. She graduates the week before that. And she was like, "Can you please wait a few months? Because he's just going to rent that house out and he has another one that he bought. Can you wait a few months so I don't have to move twice?" And he was like, "No, I'm going to lose money if you stay in, 2 more months." So she's like, "Okay." And she's like, "I'll just move my stuff to your house."
It's
Or
amazing.
Jake would have argued. Jake would have been like, "You're
Yeah.
selfish. You're this." So Kate's
It's a
starting to
little
say,
bit
"Okay."
boy girl too. I think boys with dads, tend
But
to be a
Sydney was
little
that
more,
way with her dad. Sydney and Jake
yeah.
are a lot alike, where they
It's
would fight.
interesting. It's interesting how much finances get mixed up in all of this, and then what that actually does to kids as they grow up and how they handle finances. I think
It's
that
awful.
that's
You
pretty
heard Sydney
profound.
talk about it. It's awful.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we come from a family where I was 35 when I got married. I was almost 36 when I had Jake and almost 38 when I had Kate. I had my own home. I had my own money. I had no debt. Their dad, the one thing that we are the same on is we're both financially independent and we're financially responsible. So I can't even imagine how hard it is for families that don't have the money, that are relying on the child support. But it's just money
Yeah.
becomes so much about control when you have someone or people that use it as a way to control somebody else. Steve's response to things about using the trust was always, "Your mom's not allowed to benefit from the trust."
Right.
But
Yeah.
they hear that all the time. And that's why Sydney has, like she said, had those issues with money. But at the same token, I said to her, "Are you sure this is what you want? Like, it's going to open a whole other can of worms to like not have a relationship with your dad. Like, are you sure? Because with anything, and when Sydney told, I think she told the story about how she had been very worried about her brother and sister about something that Steve was doing. And she then decided to call the principal at his school to tell about
Mhm.
it. And I said to her, I wish you hadn't done that. I said, I could have done it when I was getting divorced, of indicating that in the divorce paperwork. But I knew that I wanted my kids to have a gainfully employed father in their lives and have their father around, because at the core, he's a good person and I know he loves them. And I didn't want them not to have their dad around. And in fact, when the whole straw that broke the camel's back with Sydney's like breakup with her dad was that she finally told him the truth, that she was the one that had called the principal, because all these years he thought it was me. And I
Wow.
told Sydney, let him keep thinking it's me, Sydney. He already doesn't like me. Like, you don't want him to know that. It's not going to change things.
Mhm.
Just let him go to the grave, letting him think that it was me.
Yeah.
But she
Yeah.
told him. So,
Wow.
but
Fascinating.
but money has always been very, like, again, her dad and Nancy fought about, or her mom and Nancy fought about.
Her
Nancy
dad
and her
and
dad
Nancy?
thought about it. Yes.
Yeah.
And Nancy didn't have the financial means that I have. But Steve still made her feel controlled by the money. And that put her mom in a bad position. And then Sydney knew about it. There was conversations back and forth about money. But no matter what, even if you say it one time or 1,000
Mhm.
times, you shouldn't say it. And
Right.
no matter how much I tried to have the Bruce Willis and Demi Moore divorce, I said things that I never should have said to my kids
Well,
and to Steve.
yeah. And that's what that was my last question to you, is when you listen to these and you think back, and you're still in it very much with Kate and Jake,
Yes.
you're not out of it, but what is something that when you reflected and you listened to both of these and you sat there and you thought, gosh, I wish I would have done this differently? What comes to mind?
It's so hard because so much of raising them was on me as a single mom for so many of those years. And it was very stressful. And then I got sick. And then I still am sick. I have a chronic health issue. So it's so hard to go back and say I would change anything because of all the other circumstances that were in my life at the time. I did the best I could do, and I'll stand by that. I made mistakes, but I don't think I could change it, and I don't think I would change it. So I guess I can tell you right now that we are in the best place, Steve and I, that we've been in. I don't even know how long. It's like I said, it usually coincides with when he's not in a relationship, and he's not in a relationship right now. So Jake and Steve have started talking, and Steve actually started emailing me and saying, "Hey, I'm thinking about doing this, but I wanted to get your input." Like, all of a sudden he's like asking for my input on things. And I think that, going back to what would I do differently, I think I'm doing it, because what I could have done is just ignored his email, because I had already told him that I wasn't going to communicate with him anymore. I could have just been like, I think that's a stupid decision. I could have made him feel bad, but I didn't. I killed him with kindness, and he responded well to it. And now it's like, the other day we went to a track meet and Steve didn't know about it, and I had called his parents to let them know about it. And while we were sitting there, I sent Steve the live results, and I was like giving him all the information about Kate had got first place in something, and he thanked me, and he's been so nice to me again. So I hope it lasts. And I guess the end of this conversation could be, last year at this time, we had Jake's senior night for track, and Jake had to make a decision of who was going to walk him on the field. And he wanted my fiance, who's been very active in Jake's life for the last 7 years, but he did not want Steve's live-in girlfriend, because that girlfriend is not nice to Jake. And so he didn't want her on the field. And Steve had said, if you don't let my girlfriend come on the field, then I'm not going to pay for college for you, or something like that. So then Jake just said, you know what? I'm not going to have Brian or the girlfriend. Jake didn't get what he wanted. And Steve and I walked on the field together, didn't look at each other. We're on opposite sides of Jake. And this year, Kate just yesterday turned in her Google form and she showed it to me, and it said that she's asking Steve, myself, and Brian to walk on the field. So, sorry. So, this is
It's
not the
a
life I wanted for myself when I got married. I never in a million years thought that I would be divorced, a single mom. I wanted nothing more than to have that fairy tale two-parent home that I can give to my kids. But I needed to leave for me because I didn't have the partnership that I wanted, and I did not want to be that model for my kids of what I wasn't getting, what I deserved. So, but I just think that having other people in my kids' lives that are good role models, coaches and grandparents and extra grandparents and best friends, I think that that has helped with a lot of the mistakes that were made on either side, because no
yeah.
matter what, my kids know they're loved. And no matter what, like I said, I might be a different parent than Steve, but I know that he loves his kids. And I would like nothing more than for Sydney at some point to be able to not repair, because I think it's on Steve to repair it, but for her to allow Steve to repair it. Because I do
Well, I
think that
think
girls especially need their dads in their lives.
you touched a little bit there on community and just support. That's what a lot of people have indicated is where there was external parties
Mm-hmm.
that were still engaged in the children's lives after divorce is a huge impact on them, whether it's family or friends or church, whatever it is, but a bigger group of people than just two parents that are not getting along establishes some normalcy that they don't necessarily feel from their parents, but they do feel kind of in the broader picture. And I think that
No, I
saying
agree.
that is a big deal. Yeah,
Yeah, and even like I said, when I spent 103 days in the hospital, and I had all of my friends that were taking the kids to where they needed to go. They were spending the night over there. Um, they were doing play dates. So I do think no matter what in life, it's so important to have a community. I mean, they always say it takes a village, and I mean, that's so true whether you're divorced or not,
for sure.
because none of us are exempt from trauma, tragedy,
Right, right,
challenges, and
right.
you can't do it alone.
It's been eye-opening and a wonderful time talking to you to get kind of the background and also your side of things, but also your perspective on what you heard. I think that it really goes to show how what our kids are thinking and feeling is not always what's actually happening, but that doesn't mean that they're wrong and we're right.
No,
It just means that the greater awareness you can have in the whole thing is probably going to always create a better result in the end because things are being attended to. Even if you can't fix it, your awareness sometimes just makes that kid feel like they're not alone, in just some small way. So when I end a podcast, I try to lighten things up and ask for a book recommendation. It's completely random to what we've been talking about. I thank you so much for opening up, for being vulnerable, for listening to these two podcasts before this one, because take it from me personally, I think that'd be a really hard thing to do. And I commend you for just kind of owning it and being able to really talk about the things that you thought you did well. And I would agree that you had this amazing situation with Sydney's mom and what that kind of then did for you in the big picture of things. And I will say that I hope that what you're experiencing right now with Kate and Jake's dad is something that lasts because I think for them, because this podcast is about them, it will change their life to have you guys united and aligned.
I
Doesn't
know
mean you
it
have to
will.
be best friends. So I hope that that can last for them as
I
they,
hope so too.
kind of start their lives as adults and make decisions going forward. So thank you so much. I think you're a wonderful mother. I'm so glad you're healthy. I'm glad that you have done all that you've done, that you've recovered, that you have that perspective that you have, because you're probably amazing at your job. So any book recommendation, it can be related to this. It could be related to your job that you think people would benefit from. It could be a love story that you read, maybe Bruce and Demi's love story or something.
I was reading two books right now.
Okay.
One you can't read yet. I'm hoping that you will be able to at some point. One of my good friends is writing a book, and it's called Everybody's Talking About You. And
Okay.
she's written a couple of books, and this one she's let me read from the ground up. So I've been
Wow.
able to give all my feedback and edits and things like that.
Okay.
But the book that I'm reading that you can read, it's called Culpability by Bruce Holsinger. And it's very interesting. It's fiction, but it's about a family where the father is an attorney and the mother she does a lot of research in AI, coming from a very brilliant family. And they have three children. They're on their way to a soccer tournament, and they're in a car that is a self-driving car, and the 17-year-old son is in the driver's seat, and the parents are kind of just in the passenger seat and back seat, not really paying attention. And it ends up being that they get into a car accident because the son was texting and the car didn't correct, and they killed two people. And so it's about the whole thing of ethical artificial intelligence, coming from the mom's perspective, because she does all this research in artificial intelligence. And like the car, like when the police come to talk about witness reports, they said there's actually another witness that you guys aren't thinking about. And they're like, who? Your car. Your car had cameras, it had recorded like all the
Oh my
things.
gosh.
And then the daughter also is sitting in the back seat texting, but she's texting with like an AI bot. And so that AI bot has documentation of what actually happened in the accident too. So I just think it's
God.
very interesting for these times of AI.
Yes.
And so that would be my
Wow.
book suggestion, is
Yeah, that
Culpability.
sounds fascinating. Well, I will also look out for Everyone is Talking About You, because that title alone sounds very intriguing.
Yeah.
I would love to hear more, but I'm sure you're under some type of NDA or something where you can't talk about it yet. In any
I'll let
event,
you know.
yes,
Yeah.
please do. And thank you so much for being here. Your perspective has been wonderful to hear.
Thank you so much for having me. And I think what you're doing is so important. And I loved that both Sydney and Kate were given a voice on your podcast.
I appreciate that so much. And I think that it's going to resonate, your perspective along with theirs. And it's not something that I was intending to do. So thank you for opening up that opportunity for me.
Thanks for tuning in. Together we can shape healthier paths for families to do divorce better. See you next time on In Between Them.